Good morning. Good morning. I begin today by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Thank you as well to Currency Press for organising this weekend and indeed publishing our plays now for 50 years. I'm sure I'm not the only person here today who, growing up, didn't have access to theatre. And I was just saying to Katie before coming in that my access to theatre was those white Currency Press little tomes with the black title and the still of the play, and that was how I got to know theatre, was picking those up in libraries and op shops all over the place. So thank you so much to Currency for that, and also for having this wonderful weekend. My name's Melanie Tate. I'm the chair of this morning's panel, which is The World's Exploding, How Dare You Laugh? We're joined by Jonathan Biggins, Michelle Law, Nick Coyle, and we're going to talk for about 45 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to questions in the last 15 minutes. And I'm going to pilfer something from Wesley's really excellent panel yesterday, Black Theatre Today, and ask our playwrights in their own words, actually, to introduce themselves and their work. Could you welcome our playwrights this morning? And shall we go across thus?
Sure.
Yeah, do you want to start, Jonathan?
I'm Jonathan Biggins, and, probably best known for the Wharf Review, which as one of the co-creators of that, which is currently touring in its 22nd year. It's a bit like Groundhog Day, but most recently, in terms of writing, I wrote The Gospel According to Paul, which was a theatrical biography of Paul Keating. It's now been published in a book form and isn't available for sale at the book table. Sadly not published by Currency Press, but we won't talk about that. That's about it, really.
Thanks, Jonathan. Michelle?
Hi, I'm Michelle Law. I'm a writer and a performer. I guess I'm best known for my first play, which was Single Asian Female. After that, I wrote Miss Peony, which was scheduled to be on at Belvoir for 2 years and then got cancelled twice, thanks to our friend COVID. And my third play, Top Coat, is part of the Sydney Theatre Company's Act 2 program. So that's going to be out in a couple of months. So I was up until midnight last night editing the 6th draft.
Oof. Thanks, Michelle. And Nick Coyle.
Hi, I'm Nick Coyle. I guess I'm not known, but I am a writer and I don't need to be known to say that. I have written plays and I write for TV shows now, and I do one-man shows, which I usually take to Edinburgh and London, and I'm a Libran, and I can't process gluten.
So these panels usually look back at work, and we will do that over our hour together, but I wanted to start by sort of addressing the question of the panel, which is that we're 2 years into a pandemic. We've had fires and floods and despot madmen killing thousands and threatening to blow up the world. It's a pretty grim place to wake up and be part of the news cycle at the moment. So I want to ask you, and that's kind of a grim way to start, I know, but don't worry, we will lighten up eventually. I want to ask you, what does all of that mean? And not does it all that mean, you don't need to analyse international affairs, but when all this is going on in the world, what sort of work are you bringing into it? What are you writing at the moment? Well, let's go the other way, shall we? We'll start with you.
I think this panel was originally meant to be on in 2020, right? And it's been pushed back. Last 20, yeah.
Right.
Well, so the world was burning then, the world's burning now. It's all, the planet...
It's been on fire for years.
Been on fire for years. Growing up, there was always, the ozone hole. Like, death has been looming. It's a fun panel. And so now it just feels like we're living in a weird dystopian prophecy that we all suspected might happen. And it is a scary time because it did not momentarily, for a long time, 2 years, kill theatre, which if you love theatre and love to make theatre, and that was really challenging, especially for me. Theatre is sort of almost, it's as close as I come to religion as a secular person. It's where I gather with strangers. She gets it. It's where we gather with strangers, where we drink wine and have a experience where we can pretend we're a society. And losing that was hard. So my monologue ends with I'm just compelled to make work, and I will keep making work, and hopefully theatre will come back and we can just all keep going.
Yeah.
Michelle, what have you been working on?
I will say at the start of the very start of COVID in 2020, I think I went through that same period that many creatives did at that time, which was an existential crisis of, why am I even doing this? Maybe I should study to, become a nurse or something so I can do something that makes a tangible difference, as opposed to sort of just sitting in my room alone with my cat trying to make comedy. But it got, I guess, to a point where people and creatives as well, you're sort of searching for that lightness. And a lot of people have talked about, post-pandemic, people are searching for comedies and feel-good musicals and things that will, a form of escapism essentially, which is funny because then at the same time shows like Contagion were, number one on Netflix and things like that. I guess speaking to what I'm working on now, I guess not that much has changed for me in terms of the subject matter of what I'm dealing with. Like I always am sort of interested in picking apart the intersection of race and gender, and that's just been a recurring theme in my life, so it's not as if the pandemic has changed that too much. If anything, it's really heightened it because of anti-Asian racism during COVID. So for me, it feels like more of an imperative to make that work.
Mm-hmm. And what about you, Jonathan?
Well, I think the maxim, the day that changed the world forever, it's a bit like 1 in 100-year floods. It seems to come every 2 years now. And I think the world has been changing forever, constantly, and nothing really has changed. Tom Leary, the American satirist, famously said, I cannot do satire when Henry Kissinger was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize, because he thought you couldn't get anything more satirical than that. Obviously, you can, and you do. Charlie Chaplin managed to satirise Hitler. Sometime after the event, it has to be said, but I think, we've been in bad times. Every time my mother says, things were much better during the war, and you think, really? I don't think they were. And yes, you can turn the colour off the situation in Ukraine and it looks exactly like World War II, but it's not quite the same, and it's been forever thus. And as Nick said, all the crises that have now have just replaced crises that we lived through in the past. I mean, the Cold War, when the doomsday clock was at seconds to midnight. Now we've got climate change, but it's always been like that. And there's always a place for satire, and comedy has a couple of useful functions. Comedy is as much about survival. It's sometimes the last refuge of the vanquished. It's the last refuge of those, who are about to lose their humanity. So I think it has many, many functions, and those functions operate no matter what the climate is. And satire too. And I'm always reminded of Peter Cook's famous comment when he opened the Establishment Club in London, which was a satirical club in the 60s. He said, I hope this club can do, as the great Weimar cabarets did to stop the rise of Hitler and the outbreak of the Second World War. So we're probably, beating our heads against a brick wall, but someone's got to do it and it pays the bills.
But does it become more important then, comedy, when the world is such a mess? I mean, we've established that the world is always a mess, but it feels particularly messy at the moment. Do we need it more? I mean, do you find even just as consumers of culture, do you tend to, at this moment in time, be more attracted to the silly and the fun?
Well, I think Michelle had a point. She said people want the escape of comedy, but the other thing about the theatre is it's a collective experience. We've all been isolated, and comedy works best collectively. You very rarely laugh out loud when you're watching TV by yourself, but if you watch the same thing with 100 people, you would.
Yeah.
And I think that's the useful thing.
Have you been yes, right, okay. Let's move on, because I do want to talk about your careers and the beginnings of your careers, because we're also living in a time at the moment which is fairly politically charged as well, and I want to talk to you about the beginning of your careers and what sort of stories you were attracted to as writers, and why were you attracted to telling them in a funny way? Can we start with you, Michelle?
Stories I was attracted to as a writer. I guess I always was drawn to comedy. I think because I have a naturally funny mother, and I think at the time I was really horrified by that because I thought she was quite odd. And then I got to a point where I was meeting other people's mothers, and I was growing up, and I realised, oh, Mum, you're actually quite funny, which she loves to hear. So I think that's always sort of been in my home environment. And humour's really how I deal with, I guess, tragic events in my own life, but in the world generally. I mean, there's that old saying of if you don't laugh, you cry, and, I've certainly done both. But I prefer to laugh, and I think it makes more of an impact when you laugh. I think it's certainly much harder as a playwright to make someone laugh than it is to make them cry. I think comedy writers, in that sense, are very gifted because they can do both, whereas I think if you're strictly a dramatic writer, it's hard, it's really difficult to land a joke and make someone giggle. In terms of the stories I was drawn to, I didn't have that much representation in terms of the stories I wanted to tell growing up. I was always interested in writing, but I guess it wasn't until... And I was writing. My background's in literary and screenwriting, and I always thought and loved theatre and thought I wanted to write a play, but didn't really have an avenue through which to do that. And then the Contemporary Asian Australian Performance Organisation that's run by Annette Chenois was running this amazing program years ago around Australia, and they went to different capital cities and held workshops. And then there was sort of a shortlisting process from there. And one of my I suppose tutors at the time, Stephen Carlton, was saying, what's a story that you want to write or something that you haven't seen in the world before? And I was writing a blog at the time called Single Asian Female, and it was just about my own personal experiences of being a single woman in Australia who also happened to be Asian. And that was a story I'd never seen before, and I didn't particularly think it would resonate with people. I just wanted to write something that I would have wanted when I was younger. And I think that's been something that's driven me throughout my career. But yeah, it is interesting. I sort of have noticed that throughout the trajectory of my writing, no matter what medium it's in. I sort of followed this path of I was really driven by emotion and feeling in those first works, and as I've sort of progressed, it's become a bit more cerebral in that sense and targeting exactly what audience I'm trying to speak to.
And so can I just ask, with the emotion and feeling, like you were talking earlier, and your work indeed really explores that intersection of gender and race, which are two things that the feeling... I can imagine there would be anger around those feelings as well, and that sometimes they might be hard to turn into funny works. Is that the case, or is it just does the funny come naturally?
I mean, that's the beauty of satire, I suppose. It's all driven by anger. I think when I was younger, and I still am, that anger really drove me, and it was something that I sort of kept quite hidden for a long time. And I remember having conversations with my brother, who's also a playwright and also a writer, and he's like, oh, sometimes that scares me about you. And I'm like, oh, that's good.
Nick, what about you? When you were a baby writer, I suspect probably without a beard,
No.
Oh, you had the beard was...
He was born with a beard.
Right, you were
Out of
born
the
with a
womb.
beard. Right. What were the stories you were attracted to, and why was it being funny that you were attracted to telling those stories through?
The stories I was attracted to when I was starting were just the opposite of my life and what I was experiencing. And I remember hearing as a young writer, write what you know, and being so angry about that because like, oh, great, okay, I go to cello lessons. I'm a privileged white guy on the North Shore. Who wants a ticket to that? So I was really interested in writing fantasy and huge stories, big stories, people dying, people getting cancer and the heads exploding and wings and griffins.
It's all the same show.
Yeah, this is all the same show. And processing big feelings, big epic feelings that I couldn't compute with my tiny mammal brain. I found that trying to push them into something tangible felt useful, and then the comedy lens sort of just happened. I never set out to be a comedy writer or to write comedies. I actually tried not to for a long time, and people were like, "This is so funny." I'm like, "Is it?" Because that's my heart you're talking about. But then finding out that comedy, all the tools that comedy has, it can erode the armor we all build up, and it can unify, and it can dismantle defenses, and it equalizes, all the good stuff that comedy can do. I realized that was a boon, and I shouldn't fight what I was born to do.
Jonathan, what about you? How did you?
Sorry,
What were the stories that when you started out that you were attracted to, and why funny? What was?
Well, I actually started out as an actor first. I was sort of dragged reluctantly into writing. I'm still not that fond of it. Oh no, it's torture. But political satire just sort of fell into place because that's when I met Philip Scott and Drew Forsyth. We were working on a show called The Dingo Principle for ABC Television. And in those days, satire actually did carry a bit of a punch. I remember we did a sketch, I think the Ayatollah Khomeini had just been, he had obviously been in Iran for some time, but I portrayed him in an interview on the television. And that went to air on the Monday night, and then the Iranians cancelled the wheat trade. They cancelled the live sheep trade. They expelled the Australian diplomats from Tehran over this sketch, and we thought, oh shit. And then the following week I turned up and this was just around the time when the first fatwa had been placed on the German comedian. And Salman Rushdie had gone into hiding and all that sort of stuff. So it was a pretty charged time. And we were recording up at Gore Hill, and the following Saturday I came out to my car and all my tyres had been slashed. And I thought, oh my God, this is... But then the local police informed that every car up the Pacific Highway had their tyres slashed. So they weren't just, unless they were terrorists on a, blanket mission.
Yeah.
But for a while we thought, and then we did a sketch about Lenin. And then the Russians cancelled the wheat trade as well. Well, the Soviets as they then were. But thankfully the ABC stuck to its guns and we didn't have to retract or apologise. So I guess political satire has been sort of simmering in the background ever since then. But we started off just doing silly cabaret stuff.
Right.
And just sort of parodying any musical form we could find. And it was much more light-hearted. And it was when Robin Nevin started the review at the STC that she said it's got to be more political. And that seems to have been the golden ticket, because it's like Roy and HG with sport. Everything stays essentially the same, but the characters change. I mean, the issues that we've been talking about in 21 years of the review are still the same. Climate change, border protection, pretty much everything else. What we have found, though, that the storms in the teacups, the storms get bigger and the teacups get smaller. And I think that's part of the sort of 24-hour news cycle and the whole sort of social media thing that has crept in and poisoned politics, I think, possibly beyond repair. But that's just a personal opinion. So that was the way I kind of fell into it. And the other stuff, like the Republic of Myopia, that was just a sort of silly musical with a political overtone. When we did the libretto for Orpheus in the Underworld, that was just because it's fun and it's opera. And the plays have largely been sort of politically driven, but not entirely that, trying to use the sort of microcosm to explore the macro.
So is it then the politics and the commenting on politics through satire that attracts you most to the work that you do, or is it the laugh out in the audience, like that shot in the arm we all get? See, that's how much I love it. I find it's like when a whole audience laughs at something that you've put on a paper before and an actor's delivering it in a sense, in a way that you didn't even imagine was possible.
It's even better when you're the one delivering it as
Oh,
well.
I'll bet. You would all know that.
Yes, it's an odd experience, but it's a good one.
Oh, sounds...
My favourite though is, because I have different kinds of jokes, and some of them are half jokes, some of them, I don't know what they are. And sometimes one will land just for one person. And
That's amazing.
And she will lose her mind. And everyone else will be like, what's wrong with that woman? And that makes her, it was much worse for her then. And so she starts imploding, and I love it. It's so good because it's just like an arrow that I fire that's...
The 1%er is very satisfying.
Yeah.
Well, I guess I'd love to ask you all that as writer-performers, like what is it the laugh, getting the message across, or the laugh, is there a bigger like rush for you? Is there a bigger focus for you when you're sitting down to write a new play?
Oh, it's tricky, especially when you get up close to an audience member physically. I find probably the former more affecting. I think the laugh is always a bonus for me. I think it's always a rush when you get an entire audience laughing at something, and that's always beautiful. But I feel like when you're really affecting someone amidst the laughter, in those moments of quiet, when you've written a comedy, they're quite special.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, when you can turn it around from laughter to, you can hear a pin drop. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a cheap trick, but it's
It's an
A little bit of
trick.
skill.
it's very,
affordable.
yes, it
Yeah.
costs you a lot. But it is a trick. Well, not a trick, but it's a strategy that you can employ, and it certainly gives a depth to a comedy but some laughs are shocking, and they should be. I mean, I'm of the old school that I think satire should be able to offend everybody, if it is with good cause and good reason. And Michelle was saying that satire is driven from anger, but it's also driven from a sense of hope as well, because a cynic is really an optimist with very high expectations. And I think there's an element of that in satirists. You are not actually attacking the institution itself necessarily. You are attacking the people who are degrading the institution. So there is an element of positivity in what you're trying to do. And I think the other thing I'd like to quickly say is that I think in these times particularly, it is best if you can find something that unites an audience rather than divides them. And we've found over the years and sometimes people say, oh, you're not hard enough, you're not going hard enough. That's usually the people who have a list of people they want to be offended and a list of people they think should not be offended. And I think those lists are very arbitrary, and it's not up to us to draw those lists. However, if you can do satire in the current climate without malice, I think that's a very useful thing to do, because it actually, and comedy and these things it is something that is universal to all humanity, all political persuasions, and if you can find that in the current times and be able to open people's eyes to things they possibly hadn't thought of before, or they make them see a point, I reckon that's the most useful thing we can do at the moment.
Let's talk about this moment then in our culture, because you alluded to it, Jonathan, the 24-hour news cycle, and the cut and thrust of social media. I kind of feel like there are two ways to look at what's going on, and one is that it perhaps limits what writers can say and do if they care about an ongoing career or they care about reputational damage on social media, etc. But I kind of like the second way to interpret it, in that it gives us more and more access into the perspectives of others. And this can only increase our humanity and make our art richer, which might be a little bit Pollyanna-ish about what can be a bit of a foul space. Neither of those ideas are particularly funny at all, but I want to ask each of you what the 24-hour news cycle and social media does mean for writing comedy. You know, when you're actually sitting down, creating something new, how much you're thinking about how it's going to be received in those spaces.
I don't.
Yeah.
I tend to find that quite unhelpful. And even though our lives are so intrinsically linked with everything online now, I still in my mind see them as quite separate things. I think people can have a perception of who you are through your social media presence, but at the end of the day, you shouldn't be defined necessarily by your work. You know, you're still, a mother or a daughter or a friend, and that should give you value as a person. So for me, when I'm making work, I find it quite restrictive if I'm thinking in that sense. I tend to sort of just lock myself away in my room and I don't engage in social media for a very long time. I sort of just disappear, which I find quite, quite liberating. My ideal scenario would be, having my own workspace that's like a shed in a garden with no access to the internet except for when I need to check what a word actually means. So for me, that's how I tend to work. And when I'm working on something, I tend to not really consume anything else either, because then I find the tone becomes influenced by whatever I'm watching or reading. So yeah, I mean, maybe that wasn't the answer though.
No, I'm similar. I think writing is, you have to retreat from the world, especially if you're going to take that piece and present it. You can't do both at the same time or your brain will short circuit. So you have to have a sanctuary, and I feel like the crazy stuff that's happening at the moment has only pushed me further into that sanctuary.
Right. Now, Jonathan, I don't think that you can afford in political satire to retreat into a sanctuary, can you? You need to be on the ball with
social media of
what's
any
happening.
kind. I think it's the devil's work.
So how do you... that is my dream. My dream is to be, people have all sorts of dreams.
It's quite easy to achieve.
Oh, no, but my dream is to be famous enough to not have to have social media to sell my work.
Or old enough to not give a shit what your reputational damage happens.
Well, or just in terms of selling the work and letting people know that it's out there,
But people could troll me, I wouldn't know.
God,
unless a
that's
concerned friend told me.
That's a dream. So, but you must be aware of the 24-hour news cycle in order to...
Oh, yeah. But you don't have to go on
work.
social media to do that.
Yeah, well, let's forget social media part of it for the question with you. When you're creating work...
What's the worst part of it? You've got to read the news.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's very much part of your process.
Oh,
then.
yeah. Well, to a point. But you're right, and you think, oh, please don't let anything happen. I can't be bothered changing it. Seriously. I'm not joking. But the other interesting thing about topicality is you've only got to drop like one line in the whole show that happened today, and people think, oh my God, the whole thing was written today.
Yeah.
Even though they don't, some things are, we started the current review in October, and not a great deal has changed. Well, a lot's changed, but nothing's really changed in the show, and you can kind of reflect it by just dropping in the odd reference here and there. And you do find, I think the thing about social media and worrying about how the work is going to be received, I think that's death to art, for a start. And I think all artists and writers throughout the ages have always had their own filter of what they think should be said and what shouldn't be said. And you really don't need a panel of concerned electronic citizens telling you what should and shouldn't be said. And I think it's when we start to self-censor, and I find it terrifying that so many arts organisations are now doing that. They are exactly doing that. And I think that is very, very dangerous territory we're getting into there. And I think we should trust the writers and the performers and the directors and the theatre makers. They should have the filter of what they want to say and what is acceptable. If you don't agree with it, you don't have to go to it. If you don't agree with it, counter it with an argument, win the argument. But as soon as you start saying what can and can't be said, we are moving into degenerate art territory.
We've,
And, you know, if someone could find a way to burn tweets, we might start doing that as well.
we've,
I will
Yeah.
say it's a double-edged sword though, because I feel that if you're engaging in social media and you're referencing that in your work, there's the danger of it becoming, it ages very quickly. But then on the flip side, there's amazing works like 7 Methods of Killing Kylie Jenner, which picks apart social media and how it actually functions. And I've never seen a work do that before in such meticulous, hilarious fashion. And that was one of the most incredible works I've ever seen.
Yeah.
So at the same time, it's tricky because you want to stay engaged, and and as what you were saying before, Melanie, about being out there to promote your work. If you're not well known enough for people to just sort of see a name and go, oh, that's
Yeah.
what they make. So it's tricky. You have to find a right balance, I think.
It is. I just, like you said, I think that the social media thing is a real double-edged sword, because it can be this toxic, awful place, but it can also be a place where you meet friends and meet new people and find different perspectives that might inform your work as well.
And publicise it. It's the only way to really publicise.
Yeah.
But that was
Yeah.
that was the stroke of genius when Facebook and Instagram were created. The need to addict you, the need to so you get to the point where you say, well, I don't like it, but I can't do without it, and that was the stroke of genius, so that you are actually feeding the beast that is killing you.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.
It's also tricky because it gives power back to people who don't have those voices, who who
I
use.
don't know that it ultimately does, but that's just a personal opinion.
Well, I think it's people who are, minority people, marginalised folks who aren't part of those institutions, who have names that they can just easily put out there. They have their own platform, or they have grassroots beginnings in, YouTube series or Reels or TikToks. So I think it gives the power back to them as well.
And they
shifts
find
things.
their audience through that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I've recently fallen into a subgenre of TikTok, which is a witch talk.
Oh, incredible.
I hope that I fall into that now just because they're listening to this conversation.
Yes.
Yeah.
The witches will find you, but there's a big witch movement happening, and
Yeah.
witches wouldn't.
Would you have known about
Would-
witches
yeah.
before?
There's a lot of witches in Sydney. I know a
Well, you've
couple.
seen the Crucible.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
That's
There's
true.
a lot of witchcraft going on behind the scenes that we're not privy to, honestly.
How
I don't know how those witches in Salem managed without an
Without
Instagram
TikTok.
account.
Without TikTok. So I do want to ask as well, so I guess we've established that these things don't affect what you write and who, because we've heard quite a few times over this weekend about younger writers being afraid of what to write in case, their first play gets them cancelled or the like. I wanted to know, you all write across different forms.
Sometimes against.
And I wonder if there is a format, a moment like this in history, it's difficult to be writing plays because we don't know if they're going to be put on. There's a backlog in what's being programmed, and every 2 seconds there's a cancellation. And I think we've both, Jonathan, your show and my show, I feel like they were chased around the country by COVID and just escaped narrowly, and that was, so it's a kind of stressful time to be. And
Terrible
Michelle,
time.
have you been,
Yeah,
has Top Coat been put off a couple of times?
Top Coat's been okay. Miss Peony's been cancelled twice, so they've
Of course, yes.
So they've
Yeah.
programmed it for 2023, and I'll hopefully tour then. But yeah, it's you have to play everything by ear in this climate.
Yeah, and it's also therefore is it difficult to invest in the process of writing a play? Are you finding you're more attracted to those other forms that you write in at the moment?
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, can we talk a little bit about that?
Well, I started in theatre and was doing plays and one-man shows, and that's my first love, but I had always wanted to get into TV. And then when the pandemic hit, I suddenly could, because people were doing lots of development and people were making shows for the future, post-pandemic, if there ever is a post-pandemic. And so, theatre could take a backseat, which was good and sad.
I had an opposite experience because I started in TV and then I got into the theatre world. So now I've found that I'm returning more to TV and more to literary works, just out of necessity,
Yeah.
unfortunately. It's not that I don't want to be making theatre, it's just that I need to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the money is so different.
It's quite different.
Yeah, the money's much better in theatre. It's true. 10% of gross, thank you very much.
So do you find, are you still attracted to telling stories through theatre, Jonathan? I mean, you've had some great luck, or not luck, it's not luck, but
No,
it
it's
is kind of
enormous,
COVID
extraordinary
luck
luck.
to be able to do your shows around the traps without COVID stopping
Oh
them.
yeah, I mean, we had a problem. We went to Brisbane, a return season of The Gospel According to Paul in Brisbane was cancelled twice, including one time we'd actually set it up. We'd gone up to Queensland, raced up there to get there before they shut the border, to set it up, done the sound check, ready to go that evening, and they came and said, no, you've got to be out. It's 4-day lockdown, snap lockdown. And they actually turned the lights off before we'd finished bumping it out. But anyway, so we went back for a third time, did a week in quarantine, me and the stage manager, and managed to get it on for a week. So that was good. Yeah, although I had a phone call this morning that perhaps one of our company has had a faint line on a rat.
Ooh.
So, yeah, who knows what that might
Yeah.
happen. But look, eventually it's all going to become an endemic anyway, so I don't think it'll matter. But the other problem facing us, and I think it's been far worse to be a producer in these times,
Oh, it'd be so
they have
hard.
taken an absolute bath.
Yeah.
And anyone who's actually got money in the show, we just lose potential income, but they've lost money. And the confidence of an audience to come back is a bit difficult, particularly in my demographic, which is 90 plus. You know, so, 2 weeks at Glen Street could be touch and go. Omicron 2AB variant sweeps the North Shore.
Nonetheless, in spite of all of it, if the world was just to return back to normal, is theatre, yeah, wouldn't it be nice? Is theatre the first love of, or like, is theatre where you want to be creating work? Is that where you most enjoy seeing your work?
Well, it's the only place I see it.
Well, you write books as well and articles. and
Available
things
for
like-
sale here
Exactly.
today, yes,
Yeah.
and in all quality bookshops. Yeah.
Yeah. Michelle?
I think theatre's special in the sense that it gives you that immediate rush and you have that immediate connection with audiences that you don't get from someone reading your book or someone seeing a TV show you've written. So that's it. You don't get that from anything else. So that's certainly special. I think it's just different. It's hard for me to choose. I mean, I work in so many different mediums because I can't choose. I just love them all, and they're really different.
I love theatre. I think one of the things I love most about it is it exists and it disappears. And there's no evidence of it, and I don't have to watch the jokes slowly become problematic and stupid, and like it's just a thing that happens
Yeah.
in a room and then it's gone, which I love. And I worry that it's not a big worry, but I am mindful that when we can all go back to as much theatre as we want, I worry that the choices that programmers make will be incredibly safe.
But do you think that sways in the direction of comedy? Because, and certainly, like, we're experiencing, this world of difficulty. It would seem to me that the ideal decisions for programming managers and artistic directors to make would be to put comedies in. That comedies are what people want, and I've always thought that they were rather easy programming choices. I'm not sure if that's the case.
Well, you've got to find good ones.
Yeah, which is apparently a lot. Well, it's harder than one would
And
think.
it shouldn't necessarily be safe. I think I agree with Nick. I think this word safe is becoming increasingly and damagingly used. And when the director of the Melbourne Fringe Festival was apologising for something and said the Fringe Festival has to be a safe space for all creators, I thought, what? A Fringe Festival?
But the way I was using the way I was using safe then was not in terms of safe space. It was safe as in audiences will come along and pay money for tickets, so it's safe. It's a safe economic bet for theatre companies, a comedy.
Well, I mean, if you look at some of the big selling tickets at the moment, they're not all necessarily comedies. The picture of Dorian Gray, not many laughs in that. That's doing quite well.
It's doing pretty well. There's a couple of laughs. There's a few laughs in it.
Yeah, but...
Yeah, it's a beautiful film.
Well, exactly, yeah. It's a showcase for actor. Yes, good point. But anyway, move on from that one. That's the last time you'll work at that.
I want to go back to it. I had a question that I haven't asked that I meant to when we're talking about the days of the beginnings of your comedy career, and I'd like to quote you, Nick, for a moment, if you don't mind.
Oh, great.
In the intro to your currency edition, which is out in the foyer if you'd like to buy it after the show.
Available at all good bookshops.
And all good bookshops of The Feather in the Web. You say, once a play is finished, it's instantly dated. The characters are trapped in amber. Gags begin to misfire. Words' meanings change. I feel like this is so true of comedy, that we all... I feel like in my first play, the biggest laugh of the night is a joke I feel quite ashamed of now, that I deliberately... if somebody wants to see that play, I try not to send it to them. I try, because it actually pains me, that joke, with what I've learnt about life since. I wonder, do any of you have those moments in your past work where, and is it just the condition of comedy that we write about what's in the moment at the time and what's funny at the time and in our society, and the fact of the matter is that it ages almost instantly a lot of the time? Can we start with you actually, Nick, because it's your quote we're going from?
Good one, Nick. Yeah, so what's the question? Do I have things I'm ashamed of? Sure.
And is that just the very nature of writing comedy, though? Should we go easier on ourselves?
Well, that's also why I like theatre, because the evidence disappears.
Yeah.
Unless people read the script, but who reads script? thank you, Currency Press.
Thank you,
Currency
we all
Press.
read scripts.
I think we are progressing at the fastest we've ever... culture is changing so quickly. That, of course, things will lose or change their meanings as time progresses. But I think I saw a review of an old play that was remounted a few years ago, and the reviewer said, it was so nice to see a play with the dust on.
With the dust on?
With the dust on. Just the play as it was written,
right,
revivified and put on as a time capsule for us to see and be like, oh, this is the changes that we've experienced in this time. Look at the past, look at now. And the editing of the past that I think is dangerously happening now, Disney cutting out all its racist past, that's 1984. That's so weird. So yes, there are things I'm ashamed of, but who cares? That's progress, that's life. If I liked everything I'd done when I was 20, then I would still be that terrible writer.
Michelle?
I don't know if I can add too much to that. It's a pretty good answer.
Just do a song.
Jonathan?
I think the erasure of history is a very dangerous thing. And I also think that a lot of people confuse irrelevant and topical. And this notion that if you read a blurb saying, we've brought this piece into the modern day, making it whip smart and relevant, you think, I'll just do the bloody play. Let the audience decide what was then and what is now. And as Nick said, let them make that comparison between and see how things have changed. Because I think the problem is with the current climate of where everything is disposable and immediate, you lose sense of the context of history and the context of time. So I think it's very dangerous. I've done, God almighty, if you wanted to list the embarrassing things that I've done, it probably outweighs the non-embarrassing jokes. When I was a child in Newcastle at the Young People's Theatre, we did a play called Children of the Dark People. And people wore, black unitards and everything. And you thought, well, but no one knew at the time. And of course, there are photos, there's photographic evidence.
Oh, goodness.
And I know several people who have gone on to careers and they're just hoping that never emerges because they'll be cancelled immediately. But, on the plus side, it was very unusual whenever it was, that they had any story was told about Indigenous people.
Right.
And you just see how far everything has progressed. And I don't think you hope your work is timeless, but satire's what closes on Saturday night. And it is ephemeral, and that's the beauty of theatre. But I think we have to be very careful about running scared and not wanting to, And I think administrations and managements are the particular villains in this piece. And I think if artistic administrators had a bit more courage and stuck to their guns and trusted their artists, not their critics, it would be a better idea for all of us.
So should we, I think it's probably about time for a couple of questions. Yes, is it, let me just check my, it's perfect. We've got 12 minutes for questions. And could I please ask that we have questions of this amazing panel? Like, we've got these 3 writers whose work is so, represents so many different parts of our theatrical, well, not different parts, but they're different writers who can all offer us different things. And I wonder if I'm basically saying, please ask questions. That would be wonderful. We've got a lady down the front here. Thanks, Katie.
Thanks very much. Very interesting. I'm an actress, and my question comes back to your discussion about laughing and your audience laughing. So, as an actor, you realise that the audience is going to laugh at different things each night. And when you rehearsal, if you haven't got anyone in your auditorium, you don't get any laughs. So, of course, you get someone to come along on, a preview, and you realise where some of the laughs are. So my question is probably more to Jonathan and Nick than Michelle. Are you tempted to change certain lines because it doesn't get a laugh on a regular occasion, or because it falls flat? I realise, Nick, that you can do that with stand-up. You can change things as rapidly as you want to. And you did mention, Jonathan, changing some things because they weren't topical.
I think Michelle
can answer that too.
Yeah. That was just because I
process.
felt your play was already there. But as you said, you're doing a 6th draft or something. So yes. So the question is more for the point of view of your audience laughing that you've heard. Would you feel you want to change things?
Okay. Who wants to go first with that?
Thank you for the question. When I'm doing a one-man show, that is one of the luxuries. You can change a joke that won't work. But I have a rule that I'm allowed to have one joke that's just for me. Because sometimes, I've done Edinburgh, which you do 30 shows in a row, and I've done it numerous times, and some nights I'm like, no, that is a good joke. You're all wrong. Yeah. And so I will, if I will take the jokes out that don't work, but if there's one I love, I will say that's for me, and sorry about it. But yeah, I think that's with plays. If a joke is not working, I just blame the actor.
I think up until opening night, there's always opportunities to tighten jokes, and it's interesting going as a playwright and even acting in shows of my own before, which I've done, just to see how different audiences react. And I keep that in mind for the next show that I'm writing. But yes, that's where I've gotten to, because I've gotten my initial question.
I remember I was doing Soulmates by David Williamson, and the first preview, he assembled the cast. Gail Edwards was directing it. He assembled the cast in the green room after the first preview, and he said, right, get your scripts out. Page 6, line 7, cut. Page 10, line 12, cut. And he just went through and just went chunk, 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 chunk. And that was on one preview, and you think, oh, we might be able to make it work the next night, but he just thought, nah, bugger it. And as we were this year's review, the trouble with writing sketch comedy is always the tag is the difficult thing, and you kind of got to end a sketch strongly rather than have it limp off. And we often answer that by ending with a song. And we're doing this particular sketch. Now, I thought it had a pretty strong tag, and some of my co-creators thought, no, it needs a bit of a song at the end of it. So we performed the song once, and it was cut as we walked off stage. As we walked off, we went to the stage manager, that's cut. and it never saw the light of day again. So you can do that. And we've had times when we've had to not only do that, when you lose someone, Drew had food poisoning and he was doing Malcolm Turnbull and you could see him going greener and greener, and then he went into the wings and just violently threw up.
Oh.
So we had a short break and we got the cast together and we said, okay, what can we do? Can we change this? Can we do that? Blasey Best, you can read the script, you can be that person. The lighting operator reprogrammed the board, and then we did the rest of the show without Drew, basically, until at the end, I wasn't sure if he was going to come on as Vladimir Putin. I was being Donald Trump, and he came on with a bucket, looking as white as a sheet, and he said, I've got this just in case someone tries to poison me, and he finished the show. And the audience thought that happened every night. So yeah, you can cut and change as much as you want. That's your best friend, bloody red pencil.
I also remember when I think Abbott had thrown Turnbull.
Oh, yes, yes.
Turnbull had to come on in a different way with his...
Yes, we had to change the whole... Yes, yes. Yeah. But I think, Michelle's point, even beyond the opening night, you can still tighten stuff up. But it's difficult for a writer, I think. Sometimes you just have to say goodbye to your babies, as they say.
Yeah.
And Nick's also right. A bad cast can kill a show. And I've sat there watching thinking, oh, Jesus Christ.
They don't get it.
They're not
like
really
me.
onto it. They're not, yeah. Whereas a good cast, a good actor, and the other thing, when you let actors read a play, you realise you can cut half of it. You overwrite. You don't need it. You don't need it because they say and do so much without words.
Exactly.
Yet at the same time, bad actors can also not help. So I think you are in a position where you can. And also, the more you do it, I don't know about you guys, but you can be pretty confident. I could mark with a pencil pretty much where every laugh's going to be. And then it's a bit of a shock when they're not.
But what's also... Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, if you're fortunate enough to get a second season of a show as well, I always, between those seasons, I'll go through page by page and line by line and just cut things out or add things. Very rarely add things.
Yeah.
Well, but isn't that like one of the most beautiful things about it being theatre,
Yeah, really.
is that you can change it? You're like every night, well, not every night, you wouldn't want to do that to the actors.
The actors.
But you can change things. Like, I feel now even my play that you can also buy out at the thing, there are 2 jokes in it that aren't quite right. And every time I get a little note from a community theatre or something, like somebody doing it, I think, can I fix those 2 jokes, even if they're in there? And I will fix them one day. It might be in 2035, but it'll be fixed. We've got five minutes, so we've probably got time for 1 or 2 more questions. Has anybody else got a question? Just down the front, please, Katie. Thank you.
Hello. I lied and told Parramatta that I have a first draft of a play, and it's due in 1 week, and I have 3
Good luck
scenes.
to you.
Do you have any tips?
Yes, I do. This is very familiar to me. This is territory I occupy. This is fear is white hot panic is a really great motivator, and just let your panic grow and foster it, and think about how if you don't hand this in, your career will be over, you will never work again. It is a reputational thing. Sydney is so small. And just keep working that up until not writing is more painful than writing. And then you'll be like, oh God, this feels slightly less like hell than sitting in my bed. So then that'll get it done.
You say you've done 3 scenes?
Yeah.
When's it due?
Next, the 28th.
What's today?
No, you can do that.
20. Oh, you've got a week
Yeah,
and a bit.
you're fine.
I mean, if
Yeah.
you're working on it full time as well, something that always helps me is deadlines and
Yeah.
panic and being beholden to other people and stakeholders. So I like to, everyone's process is super, super different, but to ease the panic, will create a skeleton. It's essentially a treatment of the entire play, and then I will assign how many scenes I need to have written by each day's end. And that's a way...
Different practices.
Yeah, I'd be getting a rat test and a Sharpie.
We've got a question at the back here. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks. Very illuminating this morning. When you're writing a piece and it hasn't been commissioned, what do you do to take those voices out of your head that say, "Oh, this is never going to get on. Why are you wasting your time writing this?" Do you have that experience, or what do you? I mean, I just try and forget about it and just keep writing. But I'm interested to know how you kind of keep focus on the positive.
What was that look?
Oh, well, you've got all your plays on.
Well, for me, I suppose when I have those voices, I tend to question why they're there and why it's potentially there for that particular project. Because I've written so many different shows and plays and essays, whatever, that have never seen the light of day. And it might not be that they might not ever see the light of day. It might just be that it's not the right time, or you're not in the right headspace. And I just put those away in a drawer and come back to them in maybe 5 or so years when I feel ready. So for me, it's about trying to deny the negative voices as much as possible until it comes to a point where it feels overwhelming, and then I know something's actually wrong with the project and I'm not ready.
Yeah, I think it's discerning whether the voices are doubts about your taste. Your taste level is what that's how you judge if it's good or bad. And so if you think this is not good for that reason, I think that's different to just your voice sabotaging you. But I also think that being commissioned is obviously great and everyone wants to be commissioned, but it is also stressful because there's deadlines, everyone's reading the drafts, everyone has notes, a theatre has an agenda. Sometimes, I've done plays where the theatre has made me change the ending, and I've said no, and then they've said, well, did you want it to be put on or not? And so there's a freedom in not having that. There's a freedom in just being alone. And I've tried to change my mindset from I have to write to I'm going to let myself write. How lucky am I that I have the privilege of being able to sit at my desk and write whatever I want. So if you fool your brain into thinking it's fun and you can do whatever you want and there's no one looking over your shoulder, that's a tactic I'd use.
Jonathan?
Well, example, during the early days of the lockdown, or the first wave, I thought, I'll do something. And someone once suggested to me that Oscar Wilde's The Canterville Ghost would make a very good stage show. So I thought, I'll have a go at adapting it. And I wrote it, and I got some friends around to read it, and the response was somewhat underwhelming. And I'd paid them, which was doubly annoying. And I realise now that it doesn't really go anywhere. But that's Oscar Wilde's problem, not mine, because the plot doesn't really... But I will get to it one day, because there are some funny bits in it, and it could be worth revisiting, but I just haven't been bothered yet. But I'll have to do it, I suppose.
I think it helps having readers in your life who you trust will give you an honest opinion as well, who won't be unnecessarily harsh, but also won't, heap unnecessary praise on you as well. Often people like writing in writers' groups and giving each other feedback. It's not something I personally like, but I know it works for a lot of people.
I also think when you have those doubts, I think, Oscar Wilde had these doubts.
Did he?
Shakespeare had. Yeah, every writer does. Yeah. I think it's part of the process, and you should feel a collegiate sense of brotherhood with every writer and sisterhood with every writer. So, good luck.
And be wary of the actors in a workshop, because particularly when you're lucky if they've read it before they turn up. And I remember doing Summer Rain with Nick Enright, and the actors who shall remain nameless. It's like getting an actor to watch rushes. They should never watch rushes because they're only looking at themselves and they don't have a sense of the big picture entirely, as a writer hopefully does. And Nick would very generously accommodate all these suggested changes. Oh yes, okay, and he'd go away and he'd write another draft, he'd bring it in. And then eventually it kind of got back to pretty much what he had done. And I said, does it get annoying when the actors sort of, keep saying this? And he said, well, look, I've been looking at this for 2 years. They've been looking at it for 4 weeks. And no offence to them, but if you've been looking at something for 2 years, you do have a better sense of the overall structure. And I think that's the problem with sometimes when actors within a theatre making process, they're not really, and nor should they be, necessarily interested in the whole structure of the thing. And they can tend to deflate things and take things in directions that they shouldn't really be going because they want to serve their character or their time on stage sometimes. So you've got to be very careful of constructive criticism.
Yeah, and they've also been trained at acting school to offer feedback in that way, and so it's not always necessarily helpful. It's just that they feel that compulsion because otherwise they feel like they're not giving something.
Yes, and it can also become a bit overwhelming because there's so many different opinions. And as Nick said, the more gatekeepers, well, not that word, the more people you've got saying it's got to be this, got to be this, got to be this, you know, it's tricky. You've got to find, as Michelle said, one or two trusted people that you think, okay, well, if you're telling me that, I agree with it. And I'll believe that. Or let's discuss it and we'll see if we can come to a compromise. But when everyone does it, it just...
Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
We're going to have to finish there. Could you please thank our panel, Jonathan Biggins, Michelle Law, Nick Coyle, and you can actually...